Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. It's 11 p.m. The house is kind of quiet. The cats are eating. Mabel is curled up next to Naomi, and that's what's going on. That's the vibe that's going on here. I gotta tell you, today's episode, very excited when this guest said they would be on the show. And who is that guest? Brent Jennings! If you don't know who Brent is, why don't I read you his bio right now? Originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, actor Brent Jennings got his start acting professionally in the New York theater scene of the 1970s, both on and off Broadway. From there, he became a working screen actor, appearing in films like Witness, Another 48 Hours, and Moneyball, as well as TV shows like Miami Vice, Hill Street Blues, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, among many others. Most recently, Brent starred in Lodge 49, one of the best shows of the 21st century, and currently recurs on the CW sports drama All American. So yeah, Lodge 49. It's easily one of my favorite shows, period. I had been holding back on watching the last two episodes of Season 2, knowing that those were going to be the last two episodes I ever watched of the show, or new episodes at least. Do a little rewatch. And I just watched them 5 days ago. It's so good. But, yeah. Brent is one of the stars of Lodge 49, incredible actor. And yeah, grew up in Little Rock in the 50s and 60s. So, a lot to talk about. By the way, if this is your first episode of Beginnings, what I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like Brent. You might like some of the other guests I've had on the show. Like, for example, the creator of Lodge 49, Jim Gavin. That was a great episode. Or what about other actors that I've talked to? Michaela Watkins, that was recent. That was really great. She's wonderful. Griffin Newman, Matt Walsh. 10 years ago, Abby and Alana, before Broad City was even a show. We talked about the Broad City web series. So check out those episodes. If you like what you hear, you can always subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from. I'm also on social media, on Twitter and Instagram, at Andy Beckerman. Twitter for dumb jokes. Instagram for pictures of Naomi and our animals. Got some amazing episodes coming up, including producer, songwriter, indie rock, paragon, John Vanderslice. An absolutely incredible interview. And he's just a good dude, so stay tuned for that and a lot of other great talks. But for now, let's talk to Brent. So you said you lived in New York in the 70s, if I'm doing my math right. It was somewhere around there, right?
I moved to New York out of college in the summer of 74.
Okay.
And I was there, came to New York in February of 1985. And
Sorry, I'm doing the math in my head.
Right. What's the math you're trying to? What's the conclusion you're trying to get to?
I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so you're there, maybe the waning of the West Village kind of hippie scene, but before the downtown art scene takes over.
Yeah, when that's sort of in its embryonic stages. You know, the downtown artsy stuff. But Soho was, wow. It wasn't what it is now. It was the West Village and the East Village were kind of the funky. The West Village was more upscale than the East Village, but that's where that kind of hippie thing kind of center was. And if you went further into the village, like down on Houston Street and further down, which has now become, I guess, Soho. Mm-hmm. I don't have much memory of that being as active and artsy then as it was now. Because I spent my first year in Brooklyn, and then once I got to Manhattan, everything was sort of like centralized in Manhattan from the Upper West Side all the way down to the Village. In terms of the arts community, that's pretty much all I remember. A few theaters on the East Side, like Manhattan Theater Club was over there. The Phoenix Theater was over there. So that sort of was my territory. Once I got to Manhattan, my attitude was, if it wasn't in Manhattan, I didn't need to be there. Mm-hmm. So I kind of just stayed in Manhattan in those younger years. Yeah.
I mean, what was the theater scene like? Was it what you wanted from New York? Like, because that's the time that becomes mythologized for me, right? The 70s into the 80s. Like, right. That's where I'm like, oh, right, this is why I want to. And then I get there by the time, like, it's already Disneyfied and it's nothing like it was in
right,
the 70s. But, like, what was beckoning you?
What was beckoning me to New York?
Yeah, and then did it turn out to be real?
It was exactly what I anticipated, because I went to college in Boston at Emerson College. And I had a teacher there, a guy named James Spruill, may he rest in peace. He became my tutor and mentor and introduced me to the theater circuit in Boston, got me associated with Theater Company in Boston, was run by the late David Wheeler, where I got to work with New York professionals. So I would hear a lot about the city, working with these professionals coming up to work with Theater Company in Boston. Even did a play with Al Pacino back in that time, a play called The Basic Training of Pablo Homo. And by the time it moved to Broadway, I was already in another Broadway play in New York and couldn't do the role I had done, in Boston. But I remember even getting advice from Pacino. So he introduced me to Lloyd Riches, who ran the Eugene O'Neill Playwrights Conference, who also was a dean at the time of the Yale Drama School. And so we went down there one summer to see some plays, and I just became, enamored with and enraptured by that whole scene, because it was like the New York theater community transplanted to this farm on the Sound in off not far from Long Island, in the Connecticut Sound, I guess it was, and this big ranch house in the center of it, and a barn theater and a little instant theater on the grounds, and all of these actors and directors and writers. And I became determined. This was in the summer of my junior year. I became determined that I was going to work there. I got to get into this place, and so during my senior year, I would take these forages down to New York. I would take the bus and go down to New York and see plays. I had a little kind of gig with a paper called the Bay State Banner. Kay Bourne, who was the editor there, was a big supporter of mine, and she just passed away. She was a big supporter of the Black theater scene in Boston, and the actors and directors that kept it going. And so I would go down and see shows and write reviews for the Bay State Banner. And in the meantime, I would pursue Lloyd Richards and beg him for an entree into the O'Neill. So at that time, this was before he was at Yale, because I remember meeting him at Hunter College one time, and that may have been maybe my third time, bugging him, and he said, "Come walk with me to the train station." So we were walking and talking, and finally he says to me, he says, "I don't hire actors whose work I don't know." Mm-hmm. So I said, "Well, let me run lights or sound or something." And he says, "I'll think about it." This is kind of a long story. I don't know if you want me to, the whole story, but
I'm interested. I'm also trying to figure out. I for a while I was like, "What's this guy's deal? Is he just like some snooty elite or?"
Well, I think the deal was he doesn't hire actors whose work he doesn't know. And most, of course, the company there with New York-based actors whose work he would know and would have worked with or seen,
Right.
And has some relationships with, because the brand of the O'Neill was it took a particular kind of actor to fit in and be a part of the mission of the place, which was to serve the playwright and to put your own ego aside, and the play is the thing, and you might get roles that you weren't necessarily right for or would get in a commercial situation, but you were the kind of actor who had the versatility to do different parts and serve the play and help the playwright really hear the play and develop the play, because he was all the playwright, he or she was always writing and rewriting throughout the entire process.
Uh-huh.
So he wanted a particular kind of actor. So anyway, he says, let me think about it. I go back to school. I end up graduating. I get a scholarship to go to Circle in the Square, where I think it's Paul Mann had a theater class there, workshop. And I got into that. And so I'm packing my bags in Boston, loading up my Volkswagen. I'm going to head down to New York. And I get a letter from him saying, if you can run sound for 12 plays that they did in 4 weeks, I'll give you $50 plus room and board. And I said, okay. And I forgot about going to the Paul Mann workshop and ran down there. And that began my New York career, because I could track plays and things that I became involved in to people I met that summer, because what happened was I got down there and there was a guy I had worked with in Boston, a director by the name of Hal Scott, who was one of the directors he used regularly there. And they were casting a play called The Last Street Play by Richard Wesley. And Hal says to Lloyd, look, this kid you have doing the sound is a really good actor. He could do this part, one of the parts in it, a part called Tiny. It was about these guys who sort of weren't doing anything. They were one time they were kind of like your neighborhood hoods who thought they were going to be big stuff, and now they're kind of a little older, wondering what was wrong. How did they lose it? And so I got the part. Lloyd trusted his judgment and gave me the part. But what happened to my advantage was I was equity, because I had been working at a theater company in Boston. So that $50 went up. And I forget what equity was for. I think it was like $230 a week or something. So now I'm getting I'm at somewhere around $300, and I'm doing the part, and he liked me and cast me in another part. So there I was. And from that point on, I ended up working there every summer for like 9 or 10 years. And that became I call it my grad school, So yeah, that's how I kind of moved into New York. And then when I got to New York, I had people that I had met at the O'Neill. It was a vibrant off-Broadway scene. It was a vibrant off-Broadway scene. The Negro Ensemble Company was still going strong then. The New Lafayette Theater was still around. You had a Moss Repertory Theater uptown at Riverside. You had Hazel Bryant, who had a theater. You had Phoenix Theater, Manhattan Theater Club. Of course, Joe Papp and the New York Shakespeare Festival was going strong. Woody King's New Federal Theater down on the Lower East Side. They were doing stuff all the time. It was like, how could I put it? The social arts movement that started as a result of the 60s activism, and all of the theater and arts that came out of that movement or were inspired by that movement, that all of it was still there. And you could be doing a play, rehearsing a play during the day and going and doing another play that you were doing in the evening. And there were all these like house parties, which were like, people it was a real sense of community. There was a thing called an organization that's still there called the Frank Silvera Writers Workshop. And every Monday, which was, the off night in the theater, they would read new plays. It was sort of like a version of the O'Neill. They would read a play, and the theatrical community would come and sit in the audience, and the artistic director would conduct a critique of the play. And there was a big thing for fledgling writers, or not even fledgling writers, but writers who wanted to hear their work to get on the dais there. So that was the kind of scene it was. It was very active because you had a lot of support for the arts back in that time from Ford Foundation, different grants.
Right.
Everyone was getting funded. So it was economically, the economics of the theater was much different than they were just a few short years later as we moved into the 80s.
Yeah. It's interesting though, like you're saying, like you were kind of forged in the Eugene O'Neill program thing, where the point was this kind of egoless acting, which makes sense for the kind of acting I see from you, right? Where like it seems like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Or at least, very much like Lodge 49. Like it's just like, yeah, you right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's my, I'm a character actor, of course. So, I haven't developed that identifiable thing that's me that a lead has, that a movie star, they have certain identifying traits, and, I guess I kind of just fit into whatever the situation is that I'm put in, and I just try to fulfill that, I don't know.
I mean, I see movie like, I've only been out here like 4 years now, but I've been, from what I see, it just seems just like if the machine picks you to be a movie star, you get to be a movie star.
That's kind of it. And anyone they want to be can be.
Yeah.
But it's like who gets picked, And
then if you can't do it, they just build up an apparatus around you to make it look like you can do it. So
it'll be pretty perspective, Andrew.
But it was interesting. I was reading some interviews with you last night and just doing some research. And you were born in Little Rock in the 50s, and I was like, oh, well, that's a real uneventful time there.
Nothing was happening.
Not much of historical interest.
Southern Hamlet, swinging on the porch and drinking some mint juleps.
Right? Yeah, stickball with the pals. No, but like, okay, so you're born in the early 50s in Little Rock. What is your childhood like there?
Oh man, there's so many different ways to approach that. I can approach it like what was going on in my own household.
Well, why don't we start there?
Well, my mother was a school teacher. In fact, she just passed away this past January 15th, I believe it was.
I'm sorry.
At 102.
Wow.
Never had a sick day in her life up until the last 6 months of her life.
Wow.
My father died much earlier. I had 3 brothers. I was the second of 4. And of that 6 of us, the 2 of us left, myself and my older brother, and we're 18 months apart. So we were, because our mother was a school teacher, there were a lot of demands placed on us to, if not make good grades, at least be obedient in school.
Mm-hmm. My mom's an English teacher before she retired. So
yeah. So you know what goes along with that. And most of the teachers, because I was there, I started school before integration. In terms of the grade schools. Of course, you heard of 57 Central High and all of that. That was happening when I was 5 or 6 years old, And by the time I got to middle school, which we called junior high back in those days, which started in the 7th grade, 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Yeah.
was junior high.
Yeah, me too.
They were beginning to desegregate, as they call it, the junior high schools, and uh, I was in an elementary school, and they would recruit students to volunteer to integrate the middle school, and I volunteered, and so then it became sort of like a miniature version of Central in a few years earlier, in terms of the environment and the tensions and uh, groundbreaking in that sense. But at that time, my parents didn't want me to do it, and I convinced them to do it because I thought I was following the civil rights movement, following SNCC and Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and I felt I needed to be contribute to the movement and be a part of it. And going over there and would be a way to do that. So I went and did that.
How old were you at that time?
I was every time I tell that story, people, that's the next question. I was in the sixth grade. I was in the sixth grade. I must have been 12.
Yeah.
I must have been 12, and
because that's a strong conviction for a 12-year-old to have.
Yeah, I can actually remember the conversation. I can remember their reasons for me not to. I can remember my rebuttals, and I was very adamant about it. And I remember saying, I think we need to go over there and show them that we're just as good as them, and we need to show them what we can do, and what happened, there was a friend of mine who was in the same sixth grade class. And he was picked as well. And I went to West Side and he went to East Side. And we used to meet on the playground of our elementary school on the weekends and compare notes about what we were both going through. And he decided he was going to leave and go to the all-black middle school after the first year. And I was determined to finish it out. And that's what I did, So it's something I look back on, and in some ways it was a good thing to do. In some ways there were a lot of sacrifices that came with it, because I was a very active kid in elementary school, and I had a good social life, and socialization is goes hand in hand with education. So that socialization thing kind of was put on the back burner, and I didn't really have the friends that I had kind of moved on, and I was somewhat isolated. I was the guy who didn't fit in anywhere for a while. So,
I mean, that, first of all, that's like a very common theme on this show of
really?
of just someone who is on the edges. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think there is something about because I look for certain kinds of things in people's childhoods that push them to the margins. Right. I think that's part of doing this for a living. Right.
Right.
Is why? Because it's whatever it is, acting, just being creative, period.
Right.
I think is a difficult thing to do. So you have to kind of you have to have the self-awareness. And I think that self-awareness comes from being on the margins. Because if you're just part of what everyone else is doing, you don't ever you don't usually gain that self-awareness, right? You don't usually gain that kind of ability to look inward. Right.
But I think when you're on the margins, you're always in sort of an introspective space, But yeah, but what happened was when I was in the sixth grade, I found a connection to acting in the sixth grade. Mm-hmm. And they used to have a yearly show that they did called the name of the school was Wrightsville Elementary School. And they used to have an annual show that they did called the Wrightsville Follies. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of patterned after these old, Rockette type shows, but they would have two guys on each end of the line of the girls, and they were called the end men. So the girls would get up and do a song and dance number, and they kick their legs and do their thing. And then the guys would come up and they'd sing a song, tell a couple of jokes, entertain a crowd in a different way, and then go back to each end of the line, 2 on each end. So I was I was going to they would come around to the elementary school, the middle school, the all black middle school band teacher would come around, and she would be recruiting members to be in the band in middle school. So we get out. We got out of school to go meet her and ask, and she wanted to know what instrument you wanted to play. So she would be giving music lessons, band, instrument lessons to students that she picked, But what she was doing was picking what she needed for her band, but based on who was going to be leaving when. The ninth graders that were already over there were going to be going on to high school. So she knew I'm going to have X amount of trumpets leaving, X amount of clarinets leaving. So I need to be looking for this, this, and that. So I would come in and I said, I want to play the saxophone. And she says, I don't need any saxophone players. Now you had to pay her, for these lessons. You got out of the class, but you had to pay her. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, I want to play saxophone. I don't want to play clarinet. I'm paying for it. I should be able to get what I want. Well, I don't need, her name was Mrs. Clay. She said, I don't need saxophone players. So I didn't want to go back to class. And I knew they were auditioning for this school play, this school event. Uh-huh. So I walked over and Mrs. Robinson was her name. She was directing it. She was one of the 6th grade teachers, not my 6th grade teacher, but one of them. And she liked me and put me in the play. So now I'm rehearsing the play every day. I get out for a certain amount of time. I'm rehearsing the play. And I noticed that in the cafeteria was where we were rehearsing. They had a stage in the cafeteria. And in our elementary school, they would divide the lunch period into 2 different periods. And 1st through 3rd ate first, and then 4, 5, and 6. So the little kids would see the rehearsal. And I would notice that at the recess, as we moved along, they would be following me around. And they really liked what I was doing, and they would follow me. That's the guy, So anyway, we do the play, and then we take the play to the middle school where they have a big stage, and all the parents and people come, and I did very well. And the 6th grade teacher, she sat me down and says, this was the 1963, I think it was, in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I knew something was different about her because she was the first Black woman I ever saw with an afro. I had never seen one in person except for Cicely Tyson on television on a show called East Side, West Side.
Right.
I had never seen one in person. So I was like, this woman is different, So she says to me, I think you should consider being an actor. And I said, yeah. And she says, you have a good speaking voice and a good sense of timing. I think you should think about it. Look into it. I think you and I was like, wow. So I started researching it. So I'm segueing into once I got to West Side and I had that isolation, I also then had this desire to pursue the arts. So I started developing that then,
Yeah. Well, can I pick this apart just a little bit?
Okay, sure.
When you, outside of your teacher kind of pulling you aside and outside of like the adulation of the 1st to 3rd graders, do you remember there being something like, did you find some kind of meaning in acting, or
some kind of meaning?
Yeah. Or was it like these other things that kind of like made you perk up and be like, oh wait, maybe this is something that is good?
The adulation showed me that I was good at it. It showed me that people responded to it. So I said, I must be good at this. Right. So I should pay attention to it, and I hung out with all the smart kids, but I was the dumbest of the smart kids. I hung out with all the jocks, but I was the least athletic of all the jocks. So it gave me an identity. you know, that I realize now, you know. And also it gave me a release because I grew up in a household that had some tension in it. My father developed emphysema and had to stop working. And that changed his whole persona.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother became, the breadwinner. And then my youngest brother was, I don't know what they call it now. We called it mentally retarded at the time. Uh, uh, but it was, I want to say socially disabled, but that's not it. It's another phrase for it that's more appropriate. But he could never learn language, he could never communicate with language, even though he understood things and all of that. So that brought another pressure onto the family, with the two events happening almost simultaneously. He was, it was a brain defect that we never found out when it happened. Was it prenatal? Was it during delivery? But I did find out. I mean, I did have a theory that I expressed to my mother years later, and she was amazed that I remembered it, and realized that there may have been the answer because he had a seizure as a maybe a 3-4 month old baby, and I can remember the color of his face changing, indicating I learned later that oxygen was not getting up to his brain, So he was rushed to the hospital. I remember my parents, rushing out and all of that. And this was he was born in 1960 in Little Rock, Arkansas. So this was, a Black family rushing to an emergency room, not, panicked, not calling an ambulance. I don't even know if there was an ambulance, and so probably by the time he got care, it was already too late,
Right.
So, so there was a lot we all had to pitch in to care for him. And so we had to be available in ways that a lot of my friends didn't have to be in their households, So eventually he was institutionalized, but he always was something that we had to deal with, So it gave me, I think, an empathy, and it gave me, I don't know, it gave me something, a soul, it gave me some type of inner life that, that, I think was looking for some way to get out, some expression. And I think the arts satisfied that, I think we all come into it, but I think there was a very good point you made about most artisans live on the fringes somehow, for some reason, whether it's something that happened to you directly, whether it's something you witnessed, whether it's, somehow. I'm talking about real artists, not Steve McQueen, or not that he didn't. They're not movie stars, what I'm saying. But you know what I'm saying. I'm talking about people who are drawn to that need to communicate with an audience, to communicate, to let something inside of them out,
Yeah. Like I'm a writer, and if I go a long time without writing something real, I get fidgety. It builds up. I get like I can physically feel like it building up, and I'm like, I need to write this. I need to write this script, or I need to finally, get this thing done or whatever. Yeah.
So you understand exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
totally.
So but I think, I was definitely on the fringe. I was definitely on the fringe, and finding a place called the Arkansas Art Center, and going there and taking acting classes, and finding the sort of the community there. There was a place I used to go to on Tuesdays. They would have papers from around the country. I would buy the Sunday New York Times and read the arts and leisure section. And so then I realized, well, I have to go to New York. So that became my whole thing, I was even became a less of a good student because I deducted I don't need calculus. I don't need this stuff. I just need to get to New York, and so that became my thing. I became really I was determined, that I was going to leave that place and pursue it. So it was a goal. It was a driving force.
I mean, what was the reality of integrating? Like, how many other Black students were there with you
Well,
in this junior high?
there were 3 Black boys in my 7th grade class, and I don't remember exactly how many girls, but not much more. So in each class, there were about 6. 7th, 8th, and ninth. And it had started like there were 9th graders there who they started it in the 7th, when they were in the 7th grade, that's when that school initiated its desegregation policy. And by the time they got to the 9th grade, I was coming in. And eventually, as time went on, they let more and more kids in. Mm-hmm. By the time my younger brother went there, who was 4 years younger than me, it was, I don't know, more than 50% Black. He ended up being president of the student council, honor society, a big wheel in the school. And I often think back, like, wow, you talk about seeing groundbreaking in your own family, seeing that whole thing of like making a way for the generation behind you, just seeing the difference in that school for his experience as opposed to mine. I mean, I got suspended 3 times my 7th grade year because of fights. I had to defend myself and stuff. And I remember my dad taking me down to the school board saying, why do you want to keep suspending him from school? He's missing classes. And when he's not initiating these fights, he's only defending himself, so, well, no, he's got to go, so it was that kind of environment, it wasn't, but, there were friends. I think the things that it proved is that even within that environment, there were people that you met on the other side, white kids who became friends. And I remember going to my high school reunion back in 2009, and some of the kids that came up to me, we're all old men now, but some of them came up and said, hey, remember when you were at West Side and you had to fight so-and-so after school and we came to help you? And I didn't remember that. I remember having fights after school, and I had a vague memory of it, but it showed me that I did have people on my side, that it wasn't all bad, and they wanted me to remember that. And
I'm sure they did.
Yeah. So, so that's what it did. It evolved into something more, but at that time, it was pretty sparse. Yeah.
I only ask because I think it's interesting that, like, at the same time that you have this kind of determination, right, in you, and you find this thing that gives you expression of your inner life, that gives you the freedom to express your inner life, right? You also start going to the school that I assume, that's why I asked about the reality. Like, do you get sidelined? Like, how do you, how is it?
Well,
sorry,
you mean does that drive and desire get suppressed?
Yeah, and also just like, I assume there aren't as many like acting opportunities. You said you went to the Arkansas Arts Center, but I'm saying like at school. And I asked about the reality because I'm just like, is it constant? All I ever see are, documentaries or fictional accounts of the time. So I don't know what the like day-to-day was. Was it tense every single day, all the time?
It got better each year. The first year was tense. We had to be driven to school by one of the parents. We couldn't walk. And there was a playground that was surrounded by a fence, a big, very high chain link fence. And you had to go up this driveway to walk into the school from, it was an interest that you could take, say like it was a delivery interest, with things where you could go to the cafeteria to the left or go into the main building to the right. So, but at the playground was outside the cafeteria with the chain link fence around it. And all the white students would be on the fence shouting,
Sure.
What do you call it? I want to say epithets
Mm-hmm.
at us, or throwing tomatoes and eggs or whatever. So you had to go through that gauntlet. So that was happening the first year. But like I said, the second year, it was less. And then the third year, which was my last year, the ninth grade year, it was much less. But it's an isolating experience. You try to participate in things. I remember playing on the junior varsity basketball team in the seventh grade, but and then I played a little football. But it's like unless you had real exceptional ability, no one's going to really pay attention to you, and I didn't, and so it wasn't a nurturing environment. As we talk about it, I have to say that I just had willpower. Because there was no real, I think about my friend who left the other school, which I hear was even worse than where I was. So, but I just was determined to stick it out. And I remember we had to do, in the ninth grade, we had to do career reports, career books, where you decide what you want to do and you go and research it and do a whole book on it. With pictures and text and all of this stuff. So I did it on actor and director, And I remember it was in my civics class, this guy named Mr. Ball. He was an older guy at that time. And I turned it in. I don't even remember the grade he gave me. But he looked at me and he looked at it and he said, Brent, I don't think that you should be pursuing this, And he said, all I remember is one line of it. I don't remember what preceded the line, but we were having a conversation about it and I was resisting it. And as a response to my resistance, he says, your future looks dark and dreary.
Jeez.
Yeah. And I remember one time, when I was in high school, a friend of mine who was in this situation with me, he was one of the three students. He liked Mr. Ball, and the junior high school wasn't far from Central High, where we were going to school at that time. And he said, let's go over and say hello to Mr. Ball. And I remember saying to him, man, screw Mr. Ball. I got nothing to say to him. So yeah, it wasn't that kind of I don't know. You just hold on and get through it,
Yeah. Well, then was the willpower or was the determination, was that in opposition to these kind of people like was it Barr, B-A-R-R?
Ball, B-A-U-D-H.
Oh. So was it like this guy's not going to tell me what to do? Where did you get that kind of I want to say moral fortitude, but however you want to describe it?
You mean just sort of steadfastness to stick to it?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think it's because I loved it so much when I did get a chance to do it. I mean, it's like a drug, at that time. It was I think I just loved it, and what it gave me was something I remembered, and like I said, I did take a few classes at the Arkansas Arts Center. And then I had a really big event that was like one of those moments that redefines your life in high school. By the time I got to Central, which was the school that, everyone here knows about, I was taking a drama course. And they asked us to write, we were going to do a one-act festival. And as I told you, how the isolation that I felt, I wrote about that isolation. I wrote a one-act play. I wish I had saved it so I could look at it, I mean, it was so many years ago. And And the play was about this kid, me, who didn't fit anywhere. And I can remember a scene where he's walking home from school and he's wearing a shirt and a tie. Mm. And kids are coming up to him from the neighborhood, teasing him about wearing a shirt and tie. Now, I didn't wear a shirt and tie to school, but it shows me when I think about it, well, I had sense enough to really create an image that said something, you know. And then there's another scene in it where he is sitting in his homeroom class, and they're having nominations for homeroom officers. Now, in elementary school, I was always like vice president, film monitor, president of the safety patrol. You know, I was always in the mix, you know. And so one kid, a white kid, as a joke, said, let's nominate Brent for secretary. You know, so we're talking 1963 in Arkansas, you know. So, you know, that was you know, it's a macho culture. So, you know, that was like a slur. That was like, you know, of course I denied, you know. So I didn't have an office. I wasn't involved in, it showed the isolation of not being involved in the life of the school outside of just going to class and doing your homework. So anyway, I wrote about it. It was a play, and I thought we were going to do the play. I turned it in, and they didn't want to do it. And I was disappointed by it. So I had a 1956 Chevy, an old car, and there was a friend of mine named Larry Stansel. Like I said, I had been at the Art Center, and I said, Larry, come ride with me to the Art Center. I'm going to get them to do my play. And I get in a car and I drive out to the Arkansas Art Center. And as I walk into the theater, into the building, I see that the theater is open and they're having auditions for a children's theater play called Toad of Toad Hall. Uh-huh. And you know the play, A. Milne? And they were up on the stage auditioning, and the director was having them read. And I sat in the back with Larry, and I started heckling. You're no good. Get off the stage. What are you doing? You know, and the director jumps up and says, do you think you can do better? And I said, sure. And she says, well, come on down. And she gives me the script. I look at it for a little bit, and I start reading. And she starts liking what I'm doing. And I say, hey, Larry back there, he can do this other part, Badger. He can do Badger. Come on down, Larry. And Larry came on down. So I ended up getting told. He got Badger. And there were two girls who went to school with us that I knew. I said, you know, I know two girls that'll be good for this. And I sent them down, and they got cast. And so what I found out later, that I was the first African-American to do a lead on that stage. You know, it didn't get notated because it was a children's theater performance as opposed to a main stage performance. But the guy who ran the place, I went back when I was in college to visit, you know, and he was telling me all of the heat that they kept down because of that, you know, that I didn't even know was going on, you know. Huh. I didn't even realize it was that controversial. You know, I just did the play, and I remember they put me on local television, and I'm talking about the play. But the director of that play was from Boston, and that's how I got my connection, my ticket out. You know, was through Jennifer Siegel, who was the director of the play. It was her first job out of college. She was only like 23, 24 years old. So we became great friends during the time of my senior year. I even tore up my car, and she let me use her car to go to my prom, you know. So she became a big supporter and helped me get to New York, you know, by getting me to Boston. And from there, I got to Emerson, and then, you know, on from there. So that's how keeping that determination going kind of led to a chain of events you know, and there was chains of events like that all the way along the way, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
By the way, that's a stand-up's worst nightmare. Like someone's heckling them and they're like, "Oh, can you do this better?" And then that person gets up and like kills, and you're like, "Oh boy."
Yeah, I guess maybe that's the way that kid felt.
Did you have like a plan otherwise before this pivotal moment? You still had the determination, but did you know what you were going to do? You're like, there's something about this, but like I don't know what to do. But like,
yeah, I was going to go to school for it, you know. So I had started, you know, gathering lists of programs. And I remember my mother's sister, came to spend some time with us over the summer, and she was an administrative assistant. She had these great secretarial skills, and we were typing up letters to send off to programs. You know, I would dictate them, and she would type them up. You know, because she could type real fast. I could type, but not as because I had taken typing, but not as fast as she. You know,
yeah.
And I remember sending them to Pasadena Playhouse, and they had a school at that time. You know, and just sending out. I got into Webster College, which had a program in St. Louis. I didn't know about NYU or, you know, it was applying to undergrad, you know, and my grades were kind of borderline because, like I said, I became kind of a poor student, you know. I was disinterested in school after a while. I think that's what that whole thing did to me, you know, in terms of going through that whole desegregation process. You know, I just kind of lost interest, you know, because before you hanging with your friends and you're with the achievers and you're really competing against each other.
Right.
What did you get? Oh, I got 89. Oh, I got 94. Oh, you know, you didn't have that, you know. But when I got to Boston, what happened was Jennifer Siegel, the director of the play, told me about a summer job at Tufts University. And it was with a group called the Magic Circle Children's Theater, led by a woman named Iris Fanger, one of her friends. And so she got me a job as assistant tech director for the summer. Now, I didn't know what assistant tech director was, but I went up there and apparently did a good enough job that I told Iris, like, hey, I don't really want to go. I think I need to be on the East Coast. If I want to be an actor, I don't think I need to go to St. Louis. And she says, well, I know of a school named Emerson that you may be able to get in, you know, because Webster took me, but I had to do a semester to pull my GPA up.
Uh-huh.
And so she sent me over to Emerson. And I went over there and interviewed with the admissions director. And they did the same thing. They said, well, we can't admit you for the fall, but we will admit you. You're admitted for January. And I said, great. So I finished the job, went back to Arkansas, did a semester at the public school, university, and then had a big going away party. And in January, I flew up to Boston to start Emerson. I was communicating with them all along. And then when I get to Emerson, the admissions person that that enrolled me wasn't there, and nobody knew who I was.
Okay.
No one knew who I was. I'm like, I'm here. You know, I go to the admissions. No one knew anything about it. So I called Iris Fanger, who I had worked for the previous summer. She took me into her home. And what I would do was I would go down to Emerson at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would sit there in the admissions area in the hall outside. You know, I would just sit there all day. And people would walk by. No one would say anything. People would come and go. I didn't know anything else to do because I did not want to go back home. And I didn't want, you know, to tell anybody back home what was happening. And so about the third day, I was sitting there, a student who had been coming back and forth, a guy named Ray Shell. He sees me. He says, "Man, you've been sitting here for, 2 days. What's going on?" And I told him, and then he introduced me to a guy named Sheldon Forrest, who was the new admissions guy. And I told him what happened. He sent me to the financial aid director, Susan Levinson. You see, I remember all these names. They changed my life. Uh-huh. And she gave me a nice package. And they said, this was like on a Thursday, I think it was. They said, you can move into the dorm on Monday. And that's how that started. So, so like I said, that's my story.
Yeah. Okay. So, this steadfastness. We're right at the end of the show, but I'm really curious. What it seems like it starts with your identification with the civil rights movement, with the beginnings of the civil rights movement. Did you have that steadfastness before that, or was that really where it starts kicking in for you?
I think it was. I don't think I knew any. I don't think it was anything conscious on my part. You know what I mean? I think it was just who I was at that time. And I think I really had a drive, I really had a commitment to the arts. Like I said, I had been reading the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. Mm-hmm. So I'm reading about the Negro Ensemble Company. I'm reading about Joe Papp. I'm reading about the plays. And it's so exciting to me to be a part of that world, and so I just had a determination about getting into it. And I knew that I had talent,
right?
I knew that I had talent, and there was a place for it. My only regret is I didn't study more, that I didn't go into a grad program, to just refine that talent even more. But I knew that I had talent, and I knew I needed a place to express it. So I knew I had to leave where I was to do that. And I knew that the life that I would be living there where I was wouldn't offer me any of the gratitude, that I have for life that I have now, because of just the people I've been able to work with, the experiences I've been able to have, would have been denied me, So I think it was just a desire to live the life that I felt was in me, and I was getting support from that, from people that I was meeting along the way, like Jennifer, like Iris, like James Spruill, the teacher that I had, like Lloyd Richards. When you get some sort of certification, you can go a long time without doing something if you get the right encouragement at the right time. It fuels you through the ups and downs,
Yeah,
and as long as you can get that certification on a regular enough basis, it keeps you going. It keeps you motivated. And I got enough of that to get me to the point where, now I look back on it and said, it was easier than I thought. I should have set my goals higher, because the doors did just open. When you think about Jennifer leading me to Iris and, doing the job at Tufts and getting, then that leading me to Jim, who was my teacher and an acting teacher, who took me down to meet Lloyd at the O'Neill. And Lloyd, referred me to different directors, and, I could go to him for advice. And, and then next thing you know, I'm in the middle of a community and I feel like I've been in that New York community my whole life when I get there.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, what were your parents like? What were their personalities when you were growing up?
That's a good question. My father was very, very supportive, very quiet, very strong, very steady. And he was very forthright, very honest, and both of them you could talk to about anything, But my mother was more fearful, of life than my father because of the environment she grew up in. You know, she was more fearful of taking chances. You know, my father was more open to new things. Um, um, and his word to me was, well, you always talk about acting. You've always said it's what you wanted to do. If you do it, the money will be good. If you don't, so what? It's the path you're meant to take. And so that was his take on things. My mother was like, well, you know, I think you're wasting your mind. I think you can't control that business. You know, you have no control over it. You know, and you're smart enough guy. You could do other things. You could be a lawyer. You could be a doctor. You could do something with your mind. You don't have to be involved in a business that you have no control over success, you know. But I was willing to roll the dice, you know. And my father was okay with that because what he said took failure out of it, the equation.
Yeah.
Because basically what he said was be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Follow your own dream, you know, and if it works out, it could be really nice. If it doesn't work out, it really doesn't matter, you know.
Yeah. Also, like, I mean, think of it like this. You know, you don't have control over anything, right? I mean, you know, your dad got emphysema at some point. He didn't have control over that, and then had to, you know, couldn't work. You know, you could have been a doctor that got emphysema or whatever. You know, you don't have there's so little you have control over.
Right, and I think honestly, at that point, he had become very ill from the emphysema, and we had talked all night one day. We had talked to each other all night, and he told me he wasn't going into the hospital anymore and all of that. And I said, if you don't do that, you'll die. And he says, well, I don't like the way they treat me, talking about the VA hospital. And I asked him, well, do you think I should be doing this acting? And he gave me the answer I gave you. What he was saying was, I know my situation. I think what he was saying was, in the end, we all got to meet our maker, you know. And so in the end, all that matters is if you've lived an honest life, true to yourself, you know, because that's what we were looking at when we were talking to each other. You know, it was a philosophical conversation based on an impeding reality, you know,
right,
that he was accepting and comfortable with, you know. And so he could be very candid with me about, like, you know, in the end, it doesn't, you know, it could be glory, you know, but just to thine own self be true, and everything else is fine. So,
did he fight in World War II?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be. My grandfather fought in Europe in World War II, and I mean, you just have to be somewhat comfortable around mortality after being in battle. Right.
Yeah, my uncle and he were in the war, and there's this story about my uncle. He had like a cowlick. He had. I don't have a full head of hair. He did, and he had a little gray streak, and I always remembered that streak from a kid, you know, because he would always come visit my dad, you know, and all that, you know. So I was talking to my aunt one day after he had passed on and all of this, and talking about that streak, you know. I said, yeah, Uncle Milton always had the streak, you know. And she said, oh, no, you didn't know the story about that? I go, no. And she says, well, he was in some battle in World War II. And I think, you know, the black soldiers, they were the couriers. They're moving supplies back and forth to the line. So, you know, he was running stuff back and forth all night, but he was scared for his life the whole night. So when that night was over, whatever this night was, and I was talking to another cousin about it, he named the battle. It was a famous battle that he ended up being in. When that night was over, his hair, his fear was so great, his hair had turned white by the time the battle was over. So he always dyed his hair and left that streak there just as a commemoration of the fact that he survived. And I thought it was the opposite. I thought, you know what I mean? I thought the great streak, you know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how we got into that, but
Well, no. I think this is all very interesting. It gives me this picture because also, again, black soldiers coming back from, I mean, I don't have to tell you this, but just for the audience, right? Black soldiers coming back from World War II, where like it's a little more integrated,
right.
the troops, right? Back into the South and are like, wait, why we should be treated better here, you know? Right. That is, you know, that's the cauldron that you're formed in some way. So I can kind of see then why like the like you start getting this determination or starts building early on in your life that then leads, you know, to the rest. I mean, like armchair psychology, but like, you know,
right.
I could
armchair psychology. Yeah.
Right.
It's a reach.
yeah, exactly. But I can, you can kind of start seeing like the foundations at the very least, right?
Yeah.
Again, armchair psychology, but
right. You know, but yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, our lives are formed by circumstances beyond our control in a way, you know, and things just put us in a position to do certain things. But and what amazes me is how the desire that I had created opportunities. I mean, I remember when I had done my first film, and I was at a high school reunion, and one of my friends said to me, he said, Brent, he says, because I used to talk about being an actor all the time when I was growing up, and he said to me, Brent, man, you willed this. Because you used to talk about this with, you know, when we were in school, and now here we are celebrating your first appearance in a movie. You brought it into fruition with your mind, you know. And I had never thought about it like that, you know, that positive thinking or anything like that. But willpower and determination, and one of the things I like about the business is that it does allow you goals. You can have goals. You know, I remember I had been out in LA for a long time, and I had done a play in New York, and I just started saying, I started, that desire became very strong. I need to go back to New York and just do a play. I just want to do a good play in New York. And then around 2014, I ended up getting a play at the Signature Theater in New York, and I remember the director and I were walking to the subway one night, and he was asking me how did I happen to end up in his play. And I told him I just started, you know, thinking about it, and I wanted to do it. And I told my representatives to look out for something, and this came up, and he says, "Wow, you made it happen." You know, because I'd been gone from New York almost 30 years.
Yeah.
You know. So it's like it's fine. It's, you know, so you know, it was that same thing you were talking about. When you look back at it, you go, that's why I say now that I'm older and coming into a whole different period of this whole thing, I say, man, I set my goals a little bit too low. You know? You know?
Yeah. Brent, that actually seems like a nice place to end. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really an honor to talk to you.
Well, same here. I had a good time talking about myself so much, but you enjoyed it. So
yeah. No, it was great.
We got an hour and 6 minutes and change.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.